Manager humiliates black janitor without knowing he's the future owner of the company. In the mirrored hallway of a prominent firm in New York City, Richard Barnes pointed his finger in Marcus Johnson's face, loudly humiliating him for supposedly failing to clean the conference room properly. The other employees lowered their heads, embarrassed, while the 28-year-old janitor gripped his mop tightly, silently swallowing yet another humiliation. "You call this clean?" shouted Richard, the 45-year-old executive manager. "The conference room is filthy. What do you think will happen when the investors arrive tomorrow? Do you think they want to see dust on the furniture? Incompetence has its limits." Marcus kept his eyes down, his hands squeezing the mop handle so hard his knuckles turned white. It wasn't the first time Richard had publicly humiliated him, but each time it grew harder to endure the disrespect. "I'm sorry, sir, I'll clean it again," he replied quietly. "I don't want your apologies, I want competence." Richard glanced around, noticing the other employees pretending not to watch. "What are you all staring at? Get back to work." As everyone quickly scattered, Marcus caught the sympathetic gaze of Martha Williams, the president's secretary. At 58, Martha was one of the longest-serving employees at Williams and Montgomery Engineering, one of the largest construction firms in the United States. She had witnessed the daily humiliations Marcus endured since he started working there 8 months ago. What no one in that company knew was that Marcus wasn't just a janitor. He was far more than his simple clothes and humble job suggested. "You have 10 minutes to make that room spotless," Richard said, adjusting his expensive wristwatch. "Or you can start looking for another job." With those words, the manager walked away, leaving Marcus alone in the hallway. The moment Richard turned the corner, Martha approached. "Don't let him get to you, Marcus," she said softly. "Richard has treated everyone this way ever since Mr. Montgomery announced his retirement. He thinks he'll be the next president." Marcus gave a sad smile. "Thank you, Mrs. Williams, I'm used to it." "No one should get used to disrespect," she replied, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "You know, Mr. Montgomery would never approve of this behavior. He's a fair man." "Mr. Montgomery never comes down to the admin floor," Marcus said. "He doesn't even know I exist." "Maybe one day that will change," Martha remarked with a cryptic look before walking away. Marcus returned to the conference room to clean it again. As he wiped the mahogany table, his thoughts drifted to his life outside that luxurious building in the financial district of New York City. At night, after his exhausting shift, Marcus attended business administration classes at the State University, using his hard-earned savings. At his small desk in the corner of the library, he worked on an innovative project to improve operational efficiency for construction companies, the very model Williams and Montgomery desperately needed but ignored. The young man smiled to himself, imagining what Richard Barnes would say if he knew the incompetent janitor cleaning the bathrooms possessed knowledge that could revolutionize the company, which was silently sinking into debt due to mismanagement. As he finished polishing the table, Marcus studied his reflection in the glass. He was tired, but his eyes still burned with determination. One day, he promised himself, things would be different. One day, everyone would know who he truly was. What he didn't realize was that day would come much sooner than he expected. The next morning, Marcus arrived early, as always. As he pushed his cleaning cart through the still empty lobby, he noticed movement at the executive elevator. The doors opened, and out stepped a silver-haired gentleman with an upright posture despite his 70 years. It was Albert Montgomery, the company's president and founder. Marcus immediately averted his gaze and continued his work, knowing it wasn't appropriate to stare at the president. To his surprise, he felt a hand on his shoulder. "Good morning, young man," Albert Montgomery's deep, calm voice made him turn slowly. "Good morning, sir," Marcus replied nervously. The older man studied him curiously for a moment, as if trying to recall something. "What's your name?" "Marcus Johnson, sir." Albert seemed momentarily surprised. "Johnson?" he repeated, examining Marcus's face more closely. "Do you have family in Pennsylvania by any chance?" Marcus hesitated before answering. "My father was from Pittsburgh, sir. Anthony Johnson." Albert's face paled slightly, and he seemed about to say something when they were interrupted by the arrival of Richard Barnes. "Mr. Montgomery," exclaimed the manager, visibly surprised to find the president talking to a janitor. "We weren't expecting you so early. The investors won't arrive until 10. Albert seemed to snap out of a trance, shifting his gaze from Marcus to Richard. "Yes, I know. I just wanted to review some documents before the meeting." Richard shot Marcus an irritated look. "Is this employee bothering you? I can have him work on another floor." "Not at all," Albert replied quickly. "In fact, we were having a pleasant conversation." Richard looked taken aback. "Well, if you need anything, I'll be in my office. And you," he turned to Marcus with a stern look, "make sure the conference room is spotless." "Yes, sir," Marcus replied, lowering his eyes. As Richard walked away, Albert turned his attention back to Marcus. "I'd like to continue our conversation another time, young man. You remind me of someone I knew long ago." Without waiting for a response, Albert stepped into the elevator, leaving Marcus bewildered. What could the president of one of the country's largest construction companies possibly want with a simple janitor? The day continued as usual, with Marcus completing his regular tasks. In the break room during his short lunch break, he overheard conversations about the important meeting with foreign investors happening at that moment. "Dandy, they say the company's in financial trouble," Paul, one of the security guards, muttered under his breath. "My friend in accounting said we've been in the red for months." "Is that why Mr. Montgomery is retiring?" asked Melanie, the cafeteria worker. "Getting out before the ship sinks?" "Don't talk nonsense," scolded Martha, who had just entered the room. "Mr. Montgomery built this empire from scratch. He wouldn't abandon the company." Marcus ate his sandwich in silence, absorbing every word. The information matched what he already suspected. Williams and Montgomery Engineering was in serious financial trouble, and the management model he was developing for his course might be exactly what they needed. As he pondered this, his phone vibrated in his pocket. It was a message from his strategic management professor. "Marcus, your restructuring proposal for construction sector companies has been selected to represent the university at the National Business Administration Congress. Congratulations." A smile brightened his tired face. All the sacrifice was paying off. Studying after 12-hour shifts of physical labor, living in a tiny room on the outskirts of New York City, saving every penny, all to honor the promise he'd made to his father before he passed. "Dad," Marcus thought, "I'm on the right path. I'll prove you were right all along soon enough." That afternoon, while cleaning the hallway of the executive floor, Marcus overheard shouting coming from Richard Barnes's office. The door was slightly ajar, and he couldn't help but listen to the conversation. "We're going bankrupt, Mr. Montgomery." Richard's voice was strained. "We need to cut costs immediately. My proposal for mass layoffs could save the company." "Mass layoffs aren't the solution, Richard." Albert's calm voice contrasted with the manager's agitation. "These people have trusted their lives to Williams and Montgomery Engineering. I won't betray them." "So you'd rather everyone lose their jobs when the company shuts down?" Richard challenged. "We need to be practical. The market has changed. Our way of operating is outdated." "Maybe it's time to innovate, not cut," Albert replied. "We need new ideas, not fewer people." "New ideas?" Richard laughed sarcastically. "Where are we supposed to get them? None of our executives seem to have the answer." There was a moment of silence before Albert spoke again. "Sometimes the best ideas come from the most unexpected places." Marcus quickly stepped away when he heard footsteps approaching the door. He pretended to be cleaning the water cooler in the hallway. Albert Montgomery emerged from the room, deep in thought. As he passed Marcus, he gave a slight nod, as if acknowledging his presence. Richard followed shortly after, visibly frustrated. When he spotted Marcus, his face twisted in disdain. "Still here? Go clean the restrooms on the ground floor," he ordered, brushing past without waiting for a reply. Marcus took a deep breath and pushed his cart toward the elevators. While waiting, he realized he had left his notebook in the break room. That notebook contained all his ideas for the corporate restructuring project. When he returned after his shift to retrieve it, the notebook wasn't where he had left it. A chill ran down his spine. That notebook held months of work, ideas, That could change his life. "Looking for this?" Martha's voice startled him. She stood in the doorway holding his notebook. "Mrs. Williams, you scared me." "Yes, that's my study notebook." Martha stepped closer, eyeing the notebook with curiosity. "I found it open on the table. Couldn't help taking a peek," she said, sounding impressed. "You study business administration?" Marcus nodded, slightly embarrassed. "I'm in my final year. This is my capstone project. On restructuring construction firms," she finished, handing it back. "It's brilliant, Marcus. Truly brilliant." He took the notebook, surprised by the praise. "Thank you, Mrs. Williams. But I still have a lot to learn." "Maybe less than you think," she replied with a knowing look. "You know, Mr. Montgomery has been searching for fresh ideas to save the company." Marcus felt his heart race. "Is Williams and Montgomery Engineering really in trouble?" Martha sighed, glancing around to make sure they were alone. "Between us, yes. The company desperately needs restructuring, but the executives are too stuck in the old ways. Richard wants to solve everything by firing employees." "That never works long term," Marcus said, momentarily forgetting his place. "It just creates more problems and destroys institutional trust." "Exactly what Mr. Montgomery said," Martha observed him with renewed interest. "Marcus, have you ever considered presenting your ideas to the board?" He laughed nervously. "A janitor pitching ideas to the board? Mrs. Williams, I know my place here." "Maybe your place isn't what you think," she replied mysteriously. "You remind me of someone I knew a long time ago. The same determined look, the same intelligence." Before Marcus could respond, they heard voices approaching. Martha quickly changed the subject, as if they had been discussing cleaning duties. When the two HR employees passed by, Martha said goodbye. "Think about what I said, Marcus. Sometimes opportunities come when we least expect them." That night, in his small rented room on the outer boroughs of New York City, Marcus couldn't stop thinking about his conversation with Martha. As he reviewed his notes for the next day's class, his eyes fell on the only photo he kept on his makeshift desk, him and his father, Anthony Johnson, standing in front of a construction site years ago. His father had been a brilliant engineer, graduating with honors, but he never got the recognition he deserved. "In this country, a black man has to prove his worth 10 times over," he used to say. Anthony had worked for a major construction company years earlier, developing a revolutionary building method that saved time and money. But his boss took credit for the idea, and when Anthony protested, he was fired. What a cruel twist of fate, that Marcus now worked as a janitor for a construction firm, while secretly studying to fulfill the dream his father couldn't. What would his father say if he knew Marcus cleaned the bathrooms at Williams and Montgomery Engineering, the very company that... A sudden thought made him pause. Albert Montgomery had asked about his father, about Pennsylvania. Could it be... No, it had to be a coincidence. His father had never mentioned the name of the company that betrayed him. Marcus put the photo away and focused on his studies. Tomorrow would be another long day. The next morning, to his surprise, Marcus was called into Martha's office as soon as he arrived. "Mr. Montgomery wants to see you," she announced bluntly. "Me?" Marcus asked, confused. "Why?" "He didn't say," Martha replied, but there was a glint in her eyes that suggested she knew more than she was letting on. "He just asked for you to come to his office at 9 a.m. Marcus looked down at his janitor's uniform, worried. "But I'm like this." "He knows exactly who you are, Marcus," Martha said with a reassuring smile. "Go as you are." For the next 2 hours, Marcus went about his usual tasks with his heart racing. What could the company's president possibly want with him? Had he done something wrong? Was he about to be fired? At 8:55, he headed to the executive elevator, receiving curious glances from employees who never saw him in that area. On the 20th floor, where the executive offices were, he was greeted by an elegant receptionist who seemed surprised to see him. "Marcus Johnson to see Mr. Montgomery," he announced, trying to sound more confident than he felt. The receptionist checked her computer and nodded. "Yes, you're on the schedule. Go right in. He's expecting you." The president's office was larger than Marcus's entire apartment. Huge windows offered a panoramic view of New York City, and the walls were decorated with photos of major projects the company had completed. Over the decades, Albert Montgomery sat behind an imposing solid wood desk. When he saw Marcus, he stood to greet him, something that startled the young janitor. "Thank you for coming, Marcus," Albert said, gesturing to a chair. "Please, sit." Marcus obeyed, uncomfortable in the lavish surroundings. "So you wanted to see me?" Albert studied him for a moment before answering. "You look just like your father," he said finally. Marcus froze, so it wasn't a coincidence. "You knew my father?" Albert nodded, a look of sorrow crossing his aged face. "Anthony Johnson was one of the brightest engineers I ever knew, and my friend." The revelations that followed left Marcus stunned. Albert explained that he and Anthony had worked together in the early days of Williams and Montgomery engineering nearly 30 years ago. Anthony had developed a revolutionary construction method, and together they had planned to expand the company. "Your father was my unofficial partner," Albert explained. "Back then it was difficult for a black man to be accepted as an executive in a major company. We planned to announce the partnership once the technique he developed proved its value in the market." "What happened?" Marcus asked, though he already suspected the answer. Albert let out a deep sigh. "Charles Williams, my partner at the time, found out about our plans. He stole your father's idea and accused him of trying to steal company secrets. Anthony was fired and I—" His voice faltered. "I didn't have the courage to stand up for him. I let the injustice happen." Marcus felt a mix of anger and sorrow. His father had died believing his work had been in vain, that his talent would never be recognized. "Why are you telling me this now?" he finally asked. "Because I'm old, Marcus, and I have many regrets," Albert replied sincerely. "When I saw you yesterday, I immediately recognized Anthony's features. It was like seeing a ghost, and then Martha showed me this." He picked up an object from the desk and handed it to Marcus. It was his notebook. "But how?" Marcus was confused. "Martha came to me yesterday afternoon, said she'd found something I needed to see," Albert explained. "Your ideas, Marcus, are exactly what this company needs now. The same brilliance as your father, the same innovative vision." Marcus didn't know what to say. It all felt surreal. "Mr. Williams?" he finally asked. "Passed away 10 years ago," Albert replied. "I bought his share of the company and removed his name from the facade, but kept it out of respect for tradition. The company is mine alone now. Or rather, it was." "Was?" "Marcus, I'm old and sick. I have a heart condition, and the doctors give me a year at most. I need to put my affairs in order, and that includes righting the wrongs of the past." He paused. "Your father should have been a partner in this company. The empire we built was founded on his ideas. Rightfully, part of it belongs to you." Marcus tried to process what he was hearing. It was too much to take in at once. "What exactly are you saying, Mr. Montgomery?" "I'm saying I want to do what's right. I want you to work here, not as a janitor, but in a position where your talent can be put to use. I want your ideas to save this company, just as your father's ideas built it. And I want to leave a portion of Montgomery Engineering to you in my will." Marcus was speechless. 24 hours ago, he was just a janitor trying to survive and study. Now his entire life was being offered a complete change. "Why would you trust me?" he finally asked. "You barely know me," Albert smiled. "I've read your ideas, seen your potential, and more importantly, I've seen the honesty in your eyes, the same honesty your father had." Before Marcus could respond, the office door swung open abruptly, and Richard Barnes walked in, looking surprised to see Marcus sitting comfortably across from the CEO. "Mr. Montgomery, sorry to interrupt, but—" He glanced at Marcus with disdain. "What's going on here?" Albert remained calm. "Richard, I'm in a private meeting. Please wait outside." Richard ignored the request. "A meeting with the janitor?" He laughed incredulously. "Are you feeling all right, Mr. Montgomery? Maybe we should call your doctor." "I'm perfectly fine, Richard." Albert's voice turned firm. "And this janitor, as you so disdainfully call him, might just be the one to save this company from the bankruptcy your financial management has brought us to." Richard's face went pale. "What are you talking about?" "My management has been impeccable. Impeccable." Albert stood up, his voice now filled with authority. The reports I've received show we're drowning in debt. Your glamorous projects and reckless decisions have brought us to the brink of ruin. Richard shot a furious look at Marcus. Is that so? Have you been spreading lies about me? He accused. An uneducated janitor thinking he understands business management? Marcus remained calm, even as his heart raced with anger. Actually, sir, I'm in my final year of business administration, and I haven't said a word about you to Mr. Montgomery. Richard laughed sarcastically. A weekend course doesn't make you a manager, kid. State University, graduating with honors, Albert corrected. We checked your records. Marcus, impressive considering you work full-time and still maintain exemplary grades. Richard seemed to be growing angrier by the minute. Mr. Montgomery, I urge you to reconsider whatever you're planning. This janitor doesn't know our company, our history, our challenges. He knows more than you think, Albert replied calmly. And starting today, Marcus will be my personal assistant. He'll work directly with me to implement a new management model for Montgomery Engineering. Richard's face turned red with rage. This is absurd, completely absurd. I've been an executive manager for 15 years. I know this company like the back of my hand. And under your leadership, we've lost market share, alienated key partners, and piled up debt, Albert answered, his voice steady. Maybe it's time for a different approach. Richard looked from Albert to Marcus, realizing he'd lost this battle. You'll regret this, he said coldly, before storming out and slamming the door. When they were alone again, Marcus let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He's going to make my life hell, he muttered. Albert smiled. Don't worry about Richard, his bark is worse than his bite. Besides, from now on you report directly to me. And the other employees, what will they think when the janitor suddenly becomes the president's assistant? Let them think what they want, Albert replied. In time your work will speak for itself. Marcus nodded slowly, still trying to process everything that had happened. When do I start? Right now, Albert answered, handing him a folder. These are the financial reports from the last 5 years. I want your analysis and ideas for turning things around. Tomorrow you'll get a new badge, a new office, and most importantly, a fresh start. As he left the president's office with the folder under his arm, Marcus knew his life had changed forever. The path ahead wouldn't be easy. Richard and other executives would surely resist his presence, but he was determined to honor his father's legacy and prove his own worth. What he didn't know was that the revelations of that day were just the beginning of a story far more complex than he could imagine. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. The next morning, when Marcus arrived at Montgomery Engineering, wearing not his janitor's uniform but a simple suit he'd hastily bought the night before, the reactions were immediate. The same employees who barely noticed him pushing the cleaning cart now watched with curiosity and shock. Martha greeted him at the 20th floor reception with a warm smile. Good morning, Marcus. Mr. Montgomery is waiting for you in his office. But first, I need to give you your new badge and contract to sign. She handed him an executive badge with his name and the title Special Assistant to the President, along with an employment contract that made his eyes widen at the salary figure, nearly 10 times what he earned as a janitor. This is a lot of money, he murmured, still in disbelief. It's the fair rate for someone in your position, Martha replied with a smile. Besides, you'll have benefits like health insurance, meal vouchers, and performance bonuses. Marcus signed the contract, still in shock. In just 24 hours, his life had completely turned around. On his way to Albert's office, he noticed several open doors and employees discreetly watching him, whispering among themselves. The janitor became an executive. He must be related to Mr. Montgomery. I heard he caught the old man doing something wrong and is blackmailing him. The rumors were already spreading, and Marcus knew he'd face resistance. When he entered Albert's office, the president was on the phone but gestured for him to sit. Another person was in the room, a young woman around 35, elegantly dressed, studying him intently. When Albert ended the call, he made the introductions. Marcus, this is Helen Montgomery, my daughter and the company's director of operations. Helen, this is Marcus Johnson, my new special assistant. Helen extended her hand to Marcus, her grip firm and professional, but her eyes held curiosity and perhaps a hint of suspicion. "So, you're the prodigy who's going to save our company," she remarked, her tone polite but reserved. "Dad talked a lot about you last night." "Helen," Albert chided gently. "It's all right, Mr. Montgomery," Marcus said calmly. "I understand Mrs. Montgomery's skepticism. In her place, I'd have doubts too." "It's not skepticism," Helen corrected quickly. "Just surprise. It's not every day a janitor becomes the president's special assistant." "Helen will be part of our restructuring project," Albert explained. "She needs to hear your ideas." Marcus nodded, opening his notebook. Over the past few hours, he'd reviewed all the financial reports and adapted his academic proposal to fit Montgomery Engineering's specific reality. As he outlined his plan, he noticed Helen's expression gradually shift from skepticism to genuine interest. "So you've pinpointed exactly the weaknesses in our current model," she said after Marcus finished. "How did you understand so much about our company in such a short time?" "Maybe because I've been observing from an angle no one else considers," Marcus replied. "Sometimes those at the bottom of the pyramid see problems that are invisible from the top." Helen smiled for the first time. "Fair, and your solutions are creative, unconventional, but potentially very effective. So, you agree with implementation?" Albert asked, pleased with their exchange. "I think it's worth trying," Helen said, surprising Marcus with her support. "But Richard and the old guard will fight it tooth and nail." "Leave Richard to me," Albert said. "As for the others, it'll be up to you two to convince them this is the right direction." "Us too?" Marcus asked, startled. "Yes, you have the ideas. Helen has the insider knowledge and authority. Together, you can make this work." Helen studied Marcus with an assessing look. "Think you're ready to face a room of skeptical executives who've spent their whole lives in construction?" Marcus held her gaze. "If I worried about what people thought of me, I wouldn't be here, Mrs. Montgomery." A small smile touched Helen's lips. "Call me Helen, and I think we'll work well together, Marcus Johnson." The following weeks were the most challenging and stimulating of Marcus's life. During the day, he worked tirelessly with Helen, developing the restructuring plan and preparing presentations for various departments. At night, he continued attending his classes at the State University, determined to complete his degree. The resistance came as expected, primarily from Richard and his allies. In meetings, they questioned every detail of the plan, dismissed Marcus's ideas, and tried to sabotage him in every possible way. "A business administration student thinks he can teach us how to run a company that's been around for 30 years. Richard mocked during a board meeting. "This is an insult to our intelligence and experience." But Marcus remained calm, responding to each criticism with data, analysis, and solid arguments. Gradually, some executives began to see merit in his proposals, especially when the first positive results started appearing in the pilot projects implemented by Helen. In the hallway, however, the rumors persisted. Some employees speculated about Albert's sudden favoritism toward Marcus, while others suspected some kind of secret relationship between him and Helen, given how much time they spent together. "Don't let it get to you," Helen advised one night as they worked late in her office. "Petty people will always try to diminish others' success by attributing it to external factors." "I'm used to it," Marcus replied with a tired smile. "I've spent my whole life hearing I don't deserve to be where I am." Helen studied him thoughtfully. "Why did you choose to work as a janitor here? With your intelligence, you could have gotten an internship anywhere." Marcus hesitated before answering. He still hadn't told Helen about his father's connection to the company. "Let's just say I had my reason," he replied vaguely. Helen seemed about to press further, but was interrupted by Martha's arrival. "Helen, your father wants to see both of you immediately," the secretary announced, looking concerned. When they reached Albert's office, they found him seated, looking paler and more tired than usual. Richard was with him, a smug smile on his face. "What happened?" Helen asked, alarmed at her father's condition. "Richard has brought some troubling accusations," Albert replied, his voice weary. "About Marcus." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. What could Richard have uncovered? "What accusations?" he asked, keeping his voice steady. Richard smirked coldly, placing a folder on the desk. "I have proof that you're using confidential information from Montgomery Engineering in your academic project. In other words, corporate espionage." "That's absurd," Marcus protested. "My academic project started long before I had access to any confidential company information." "Then how do you explain this?" Richard opened the folder, revealing copies of Marcus's academic work with annotations that included specific Montgomery data, confidential figures, internal strategies, all in your college paper. Marcus felt his blood run cold. The notes were real. He had updated his project with company information after starting as Albert's assistant, but not for academic use, only to refine his internal analyses. "Mr. Montgomery, I can explain," he began, but Richard cut him off. "Explain how you're stealing trade secrets? How you plan to use our intellectual property to advance yourself?" Richard turned to Albert. "Exactly as I suspected from the start. He's not here to help the company. He's here to exploit it." Helen, who had been examining the documents, stepped in. "Wait a minute. These notes are dated after Marcus officially started working with us. As an executive assistant, he has every right to access and analyze this data. But not to use it in academic work," Richard insisted. "That violates our confidentiality agreement." Marcus turned to Albert, who was watching him with an unreadable expression. "Mr. Montgomery, these notes were made to improve my analysis for the company, not for my academic work. In fact, I asked my advisor for permission to change my project precisely to avoid any conflict of interest." "Can you prove that?" Albert asked seriously. "Yes, I have the emails exchanged with my advisor and the updated version of my project, which contains no specific information from Montgomery Engineering." Richard laughed sarcastically. "Of course you'd say that. You probably already altered everything to cover your tracks." "Richard, that's enough." Albert's voice grew firm. "Let's verify the facts before making such serious accusations." "You're being manipulated," Richard exclaimed, losing his composure. "First, you accept this nobody as a special assistant, give him access to confidential information, and now you refuse to see the truth when it's right in front of you." "The only manipulation I see here is yours, Richard," Albert replied calmly. "You've been determined to sabotage Marcus from day one. The question is, why?" Richard seemed momentarily thrown off. "Because he's a fraud. He doesn't belong at this level of the company." "And who decides who belongs where, you?" Albert rose slowly, his presence still commanding despite his age. "This is still my company, Richard. I decide who I hire and who I trust. Your father trusted the wrong people, and look what happened." Richard shot back before realizing his mistake. A heavy silence fell over the room. Albert stared at Richard with new intensity. "What do you know about my father, Richard seemed to realize he'd stepped into dangerous territory. Just what everyone knows, that he lost a lot of money trusting the wrong partners." Albert exchanged a meaningful look with Marcus before turning his attention back to Richard. "Richard, you're suspended until further notice. Please hand your badge to Martha on your way out." "What? This is outrageous. I've worked my whole life for this company." Richard protested in disbelief. "And you'll be fairly compensated for it," Albert replied coldly. "But your recent conduct, including this attempt at defamation, is unacceptable. Now please leave." Richard glared at each of them, his face twisted in anger. "You'll regret this, all of you," he threatened before slamming the door on his way out. When they were alone, Albert sighed deeply, suddenly looking exhausted. Helen rushed to her father's side, concerned. "Dad, are you okay? You need to rest." "I'm fine, sweetheart," he assured her, though his pallor suggested otherwise. Turning to Marcus, he asked, "You really didn't use company information in your academic work?" "No, sir. As I said, I completely revised my project after starting here to avoid any conflict. I can show you all the documentation." Albert nodded, seeming satisfied. "I believe you, Marcus. But Richard's comment about my father has me puzzled. He seemed to know something specific." Helen looked confused. "What could Richard know about Grandpa? He wasn't even working here back then." "No, but his father was," Albert said thoughtfully. Ronald Barnes was Charles Williams' lawyer. Marcus felt a chill, another connection to the past that couldn't be a coincidence. "Mr. Montgomery, I think it's time to tell Helen the whole truth," Marcus said gently. Albert hesitated, looking at his daughter. "You're right, I've kept secrets for far too long." In the hours that followed, Albert revealed to Helen the entire story about Anthony Johnson, Marcus's father, and how he had been wronged years ago. He spoke of the promised partnership that never materialized, how Charles Williams had stolen Anthony's ideas with Ronald Barnes's help, and how he himself, Albert, had been too cowardly to stand up at the time. "So that's why you brought Marcus into the company," Helen concluded, looking at the young man with new eyes. "It's a form of restitution." "Partly, yes," Albert admitted, "but also because I recognize the same brilliance in him as his father. The company needs that talent now more than ever." Helen turned to Marcus. "Did you know about this when you came to work here as a janitor?" Marcus shook his head. "No. My father never mentioned the name of the company that betrayed him. I only realized the connection when Mr. Montgomery told me." "Then why did you choose to work here?" Helen pressed. Marcus smiled faintly. "Because Montgomery Engineering was the largest construction firm in New York City, and I wanted to understand how a company of that scale operated from the inside for my academic project." Helen seemed impressed by Marcus's determination. "You subjected yourself to working as a janitor, enduring daily humiliations, just to study the company from within." "Life rarely offers us easy paths, Helen," Marcus replied simply, "especially for someone in my position." Helen looked at her father. "And now, what happens after Richard's suspension?" Albert sighed. "We need to be careful. Richard has allies on the board, and this dispute could get very ugly. He won't accept the suspension easily." "Should we be worried about what he said about us regretting it?" Marcus asked. "Richard has always been dramatic," Albert answered, though his tone wasn't entirely convincing. "But we'd better be prepared for anything." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "Maybe it's time to speed up the implementation of the new management model. If we can show quick results, the board will side with us no matter what Richard tries." "I agree," Helen said, surprising both Albert and Marcus with her firm support. "In fact, I have some ideas on how we can do that." As Helen explained her plan, Marcus couldn't help but admire her. She was brilliant, determined, and contrary to his initial impression, open to new ideas. In just a few weeks of working together, she had become not just an ally, but someone he felt growing admiration for. Albert watched their interaction with a small smile. Perhaps he thought beyond correcting past mistakes, he was also paving the way for the company's future. The plan was ambitious. In just 30 days, they would implement the new management model company-wide, reorganize departments to eliminate redundancies, and launch 2 new projects using the innovative methodology Marcus had developed. "It's risky," Albert remarked. "If we fail, the board will have every reason to step in. But if we succeed, no one will be able to question our approach," Helen replied confidently. "Then it's decided," Albert concluded. "You have 30 days to prove this new model works." That night, as Marcus returned to his small apartment, he received a message from Helen. "Meeting tomorrow, 7 a.m., before everyone arrives. We need to start immediately. I believe in you, Marcus. Let's make this work." He smiled at his phone. For the first time in a long while, he felt he truly belonged somewhere. And more than that, he felt he might finally honor his father's legacy. What he didn't know was that Richard Barnes had no intention of accepting his defeat quietly. At that very moment, the suspended manager was digging through old files, searching for something he could use against Albert and Marcus. And what he found could change everything. The next day, Marcus arrived at the company at 6:45 a.m., determined to be well prepared for the meeting with Helen. To his surprise, she was already there, surrounded by papers, her hair tied in a messy bun as if she'd been working for hours. "You're early," he remarked, impressed by her dedication. "Actually, I never left yesterday," she replied without looking up from the documents. "After you and Dad left, I started running some numbers and, well, I lost track of time." Marcus stepped closer, noticing the dark circles under Helen's eyes. You need to rest. We're not going to revolutionize the company in a single day. Helen finally looked at him, a small smile on her lips. Spoken by the man who worked as a janitor by day and studied business administration at night. Touché, Marcus replied, laughing. But at least I slept a few hours. Don't worry, I'm used to it. She pointed to the notes, scattered across the table. Look at this. I analyzed your models and realized we can implement them even faster if we reorganize the finance department first. Marcus examined the numbers, impressed by Helen's insight. She hadn't just understood his proposals perfectly, she had improved them with her inside knowledge of the company. This is brilliant, he admitted, genuinely admiring. You've simplified the process in a way I hadn't considered. I've been watching the company's problems for years, Helen explained. I just didn't have the right tools to fix them. Your ideas were the missing piece. The two spent the next 2 hours refining the plan, complementing each other's ideas with a synchronicity that surprised them both. By the time the first employees started arriving, they already had a detailed roadmap for the next 30 days. We need to communicate this carefully, Helen warned. Changes always meet resistance, especially when they come from... She hesitated. From a former janitor. Marcus finished without resentment. Don't worry, I'm aware of the barriers we're facing. It's not fair, Helen shook her head. Your work should speak for itself. And it will, in time. Marcus glanced at his watch. We should prepare for the meeting with the department managers. They'll be here in an hour. Helen agreed, but before they could continue, the door swung open and Martha rushed in. Helen, Marcus, her voice trembled slightly. I just got a call. Mr. Montgomery is in the hospital. He had a heart attack last night. Helen instantly paled. My God, which hospital? Mount Sinai, your mother is with him. Helen was already grabbing her purse. How is he? Is it serious? Stable, but the doctors are concerned, Martha replied, visibly shaken. He was asking for both of you. Helen turned to Marcus. Come with me, we need to be there. Marcus hesitated, embarrassed. Me? But this is a family moment. I shouldn't. My father trusts you. Helen interrupted firmly. And he clearly wants you there. Let's go. In the taxi heading to the hospital, Helen was visibly distressed, though she tried to keep her composure. He hasn't been feeling well for days, she confessed, but he refused to slow down or see a doctor. So stubborn. Marcus wasn't sure what to say. He gently placed his hand over hers. Your father is a strong man. He'll pull through. Helen looked at him, revealing vulnerability for the first time since they'd met. And what if he doesn't, Marcus? What if... Don't think like that. He gently squeezed her hand. Let's focus on being there for him now. At the hospital, they were greeted by Catherine Montgomery, Helen's mother, an elegant 65-year-old woman with tired, worried eyes. Helen, darling, she embraced her daughter. Your father is stable now, but it was close. If the security guard hadn't arrived when he did. Helen swallowed hard. Can we see him? Soon. The doctors are with him now. Catherine finally noticed Marcus. And you are... Marcus Johnson, special assistant to Mr. Montgomery. He introduced himself respectfully. Recognition flickered in Catherine's eyes. Ah, Anthony's son, she said softly. Albert told me about you. Your father was a good man. Marcus hadn't expected that. You knew my father? Yes, in the early years of the company. She smiled sadly. Albert always regretted what happened. He tried to find your father years later to make things right, but he never could. Before they could continue, a doctor approached. Montgomery, family. When they nodded, he continued, Mr. Montgomery is conscious now. The attack was severe, but we've stabilized him. However, he'll need complete rest. No work, no stress. He'll take that well, Helen remarked sarcastically. He has no choice, the doctor replied seriously. Another attack like this could be fatal. You can see him now, but only for a few minutes, and no stressful matters. In the ICU, Albert was hooked to several monitors, looking frail and much older than his 70 years. When he saw Helen and Marcus, he tried to smile. You didn't have to interrupt work for me, he said weakly. Dad, please. Helen took his hand. You gave us a terrible scare. Sorry, sweetheart. It wasn't intentional. He gently squeezed his daughter's hand before turning to Marcus. "And you, young man, ready to take on more responsibility?" Marcus frowned, confused. "Sir, during my absence, you and Helen will have to handle the project without me," Albert explained. "The doctors say I can't return to work for at least a month." Marcus and Helen exchanged glances. "Don't worry about that now, Mr. Montgomery," Marcus said gently. "What matters is your recovery." Albert waved impatiently. "The board is meeting tomorrow. With my hospitalization, they'll need to appoint an interim chairman." He looked meaningfully at Helen. "You need to be there, my dear. And bring Marcus." Helen looked concerned. "Richard will definitely try to use this to his advantage." "Exactly," Albert agreed. "He has allies on the board. If he becomes interim chairman, all our work will be at risk." "I won't let that happen," Helen promised firmly. A nurse entered, signaling that visiting time was over. "Let's let you rest, Dad," Helen said, kissing his forehead. "We'll take care of everything." As they left the room, Catherine walked them to the hallway. "I'll stay here with him," she said. "Helen, you must stop Richard from taking control of the company. Your father wouldn't survive seeing everything he fought for in that man's hands." "I know, Mum. We'll do our best." In the cab back to the office, Helen and Marcus discussed their options. "The board consists of 5 members," Helen explained. "My father, me, Richard, Dr. Linda Carter, and Dr. Peter Foster. With my father out and Richard suspended, technically there are only 3 voting members." "But Richard's suspension wasn't formalized," Marcus reminded her. "It was just your father's verbal decision." Helen nodded, worried. "Which means Richard will likely show up at tomorrow's meeting as if nothing happened." "What about the other board members? Where do they stand?" "Linda is a longtime family friend. I think we can count on your support. Paul..." Helen hesitated. "Paul and Richard are close. They play golf together, move in the same social circles." Marcus processed the information. "So if you and Linda vote against Richard, and Paul votes for him, we'll have a tie. And in case of a tie, the deciding vote would go to the chairman," Helen added, "who's in the hospital." When they arrived at the company, they were met with curious glances and whispers. The news about Albert had already spread, along with speculation about who would take charge. "I need to call Linda right away," Helen said as they hurried to her office. "We need to secure her support." But when they got there, they found the door slightly ajar. Someone had been inside. "Wait." Marcus grabbed Helen's arm before she could enter. "Something's not right." Carefully, he pushed the door open. Nothing seemed out of place except the notes. Helen rushed to the desk. "All the documents about our restructuring plan, they're gone." Marcus quickly scanned the room. "Someone took our files, and I bet we know who it was." Helen picked up the phone, dialing rapidly. "I'll check the security cameras." While she spoke with the security department, Marcus noticed a small, shiny object under the desk. Picking it up, he saw it was a gold cufflink with the initials RB. "Helen," he showed her the object. "Looks like Richard left a calling card." Helen hung up the phone, frustrated. The floor cameras were turned off for scheduled maintenance. "This morning. Convenient, isn't it?" Marcus looked at the cufflink in his hand. "He's getting careless. This could be useful." "How? We don't have concrete proof he was here." "No, but we have this." Marcus opened his briefcase and pulled out a small storage device. "I backed up all our documents last night. A habit I picked up after losing college work to computer problems." The relief on Helen's face was clear. "Marcus, you're amazing!" she exclaimed without thinking, impulsively hugging him. For a moment they stayed like that, surprisingly close. When they pulled apart, both seemed a little embarrassed. "We need to prepare for tomorrow," Helen said, regaining her composure. "The board meeting is at 9 a.m. Richard will certainly come with a plan." "And we'll have ours," Marcus replied with determination. "Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing, the morning of the board meeting arrived faster than expected. Marcus woke after just 4 hours of sleep, having spent the entire night preparing a full presentation with Helen. When he got to the company, he found her already in her office, impeccably dressed but with dark circles faintly visible under her makeup. "Did you get any sleep?" he asked. Almost none, she admitted. I stopped by the hospital before coming here. Daddy's stable, but the doctors are still concerned. Marcus nodded understandingly. Ready for battle? Helen smiled despite her. Exhaustion. More than ever. Richard won't know what hit him. At 8:45, they headed to the boardroom, an imposing space on the top floor of the building with a dark oval wood table and a panoramic view of New York City. Dr. Linda Carter, a 60-year-old woman with practical gray hair, was already there. Helen, dear, she embraced the younger woman with genuine affection. How's your father? Stable, but he'll need time to recover, Helen replied. Dr. Linda, this is Marcus Johnson, my father's special assistant. Linda shook Marcus's hand firmly. I've heard a lot about you, young man, she remarked. Albert is very impressed with your work. Before they could continue the conversation, the door opened and Richard entered, followed by Dr. Peter Foster, a heavy-set man in his 50s. Richard looked confident, wearing an impeccable suit and smiling as if he had already secured victory. Helen, it's so good to see you, he greeted with false warmth. How is your father? Such a shame what happened. The condescending tone made Helen's blood boil, but she kept her composure. He's recovering. Thank you for your concern, she replied coldly. Richard then noticed Marcus. Mr. Johnson, he said, not hiding his disdain. I didn't realize assistants were allowed to attend board meetings. Mr. Johnson is here at my invitation, Helen interjected firmly. As special assistant to the presidency, his expertise will be valuable to our discussion. Peter Foster seemed uneasy. Isn't that a bit irregular? The board is typically restricted to its members. In extraordinary circumstances, we can make adjustments, Linda replied, clearly supporting Helen. And given Albert's condition, I'd say these are extraordinary circumstances. Richard shrugged, his smile never wavering. Fine by me. I have nothing to hide. Everyone took their seats at the table, with Albert's chair noticeably empty at the head. Helen formally opened the meeting. Given the temporary hospitalization of President Albert Montgomery, we've called this emergency. Meeting to discuss interim leadership. Everyone received the agenda in advance. Any objections before we begin? No one spoke up, and Helen continued. The first item is the appointment of an interim president until Mr. Montgomery's return. Would anyone like to propose a candidate? As expected, Richard was the first. If I may, I'd like to put my name forward for consideration, he said confidently. As the most senior executive manager, with 15 years of dedication to Montgomery, I believe I'm ideally positioned to step in temporarily. I know all the processes, clients, and ongoing projects. Peter immediately backed him. I agree, Richard has the necessary experience and the market's trust. Helen remained calm. Before we discuss candidates, we need to address an important matter, she said, looking directly at Richard. Mr. Barnes, you were suspended by Mr. Montgomery 2 days ago. How do you explain your presence at this meeting? Richard didn't flinch. A verbal decision with no official documentation. As an elected board member, I have the right to be here unless the board formally votes to remove me. Besides, Peter interjected, any decisions made by Albert in recent days should be reassessed. It's common knowledge his health was affecting his judgment. Helen felt her anger rise, but Marcus discreetly touched her arm under the table, a silent reminder to stay composed. Let's clarify a few things, she said, her voice controlled. My father was in full command of his faculties until the moment of his hospitalization. Any suggestion otherwise is not only false, but deeply disrespectful. Linda nodded in agreement. As a doctor and a personal friend of Albert's for over 30 years, I can attest his judgment remained impeccable, despite his heart issues. Richard smiled, unfazed. No one is questioning Albert's integrity, just acknowledging that people under health stress might make rash decisions. He glanced at Marcus. Like promoting a janitor to special assistant, for example. The insult was deliberate, but Marcus didn't react. Instead, he calmly opened his folder. If I may, he said politely, I'd like to present some data that may be relevant to this discussion. I don't see how a junior employee's opinion could be relevant to board decisions, Richard countered. Mr. Barnes, Linda's voice became firm. We all know your opinion of Mr. Johnson. However, as an advisor, I'm interested in hearing what he has to say. Paul seemed uncomfortable, but didn't object. Helen motioned for Marcus to continue. Calmly and precisely, Marcus began presenting the company's financial data from the last 5 years, highlighting concerning trends of declining profitability and rising operational costs, all coinciding with specific decisions made under Richard's management. As you can see, he explained, displaying comparative charts, projects directly overseen by Mr. Barnes consistently exceeded the budget by an average of 32%, while delivering results 18% below initial projections. Richard's face grew increasingly red. This is absurd. You're manipulating these numbers. All data comes directly from the company's official reports, Marcus replied calmly, distributing printed copies. You can verify them yourselves. Linda examined the documents carefully, her expression turning grave. This is very concerning. Why was the board never informed about these performances? Richard was visibly shaken but tried to maintain composure. This data is being presented out of context. The projects I managed were inherently more complex and risky. Actually, Marcus continued, presenting a new set of charts, when we adjust for project complexity using standard industry methodology, the performance is even worse, and there's more. He then revealed evidence of questionable decisions made by Richard in recent years. Contracts awarded to suppliers with above-market prices, some with personal connections to him, qualified employees dismissed and replaced by less competent, but loyal individuals, and market strategies that prioritized short-term gains at the expense of the company's long-term financial health. Paul, who initially seemed skeptical, now examined the documents with growing concern. This is very serious, Richard. Do you have any explanation? Richard abruptly stood up, slamming the table. This is a sham, an orchestrated attempt to slander me, he pointed at Marcus. This outsider comes out of nowhere, gains Albert's trust through some kind of manipulation, and now tries to destroy me with lies. These aren't lies, Mr. Barnes, Marcus replied calmly. These are the company's own numbers, numbers you hoped no one would scrutinize closely. Richard then changed tactics, turning to Helen. I see what's happening here. You want the presidency even without sufficient experience, and you're using this young man to do your dirty work. Helen smiled, unshaken. Actually, Richard, I have no intention of running for interim president. I consider myself far too inexperienced for such a role. This took everyone by surprise, including Marcus. Then who? Paul began. I'd like to propose Dr. Linda Carter for the position, Helen continued. And with over 30 years of industry experience, an impeccable ethical record, and deep knowledge of Montgomery engineering, I believe she is the ideal person to lead the company during my father's recovery. Linda seemed genuinely surprised. Helen, I didn't expect this. It's the logical choice, Helen replied, and I'm certain my father would agree. Richard looked as if he had been doused with cold water. His strategy had clearly been prepared to counter Helen, not Linda. This is unexpected, he managed to say finally, but I will respect the board's decision. Paul, after carefully examining the documents presented by Marcus, seemed deeply troubled. I think we need to seriously consider Helen's proposal, he said, much to Richard's surprise. Linda has unquestionable experience and integrity. Paul, Richard exclaimed, feeling betrayed. I thought you understood the importance of operational continuity. I understand the importance of integrity, Richard, Paul replied firmly. And these numbers worry me greatly. We need to investigate this thoroughly. The vote that followed was swift. Linda, Helen, and Paul voted in favor of appointing Linda as interim president. Richard, isolated, was the only opposing vote. It's decided then, Helen announced. Dr. Linda Carter will assume the role of interim president, effective immediately, until Albert Montgomery's return. Linda accepted the position with dignity. Thank you for your trust. I promise to honor it. And my first action will be to form a committee to fully investigate the irregularities pointed out by Mr. Johnson. Richard, until this investigation is concluded, you will remain suspended from your duties. Richard stood up, pale with anger. You'll regret this, all of you, he threatened, before slamming the door on his way out. When only the three of them remained in the room, Linda turned to Helen and Marcus. Brilliant strategy, you two. Richard never saw it coming. Helen smiled. But you knew, didn't you? Dad spoke to you beforehand. Linda nodded. Last night from the hospital. He said he trusted both of you completely, but that a contingency plan would be useful. Marcus looked at Helen with admiration. You planned this all along. I learned from the best, she replied with a small smile. Now, we have a lot of work ahead. We need to implement our restructuring plan immediately, before Richard tries to sabotage anything else. Linda agreed. You have my full support. The company has needed this change for a long time. She looked at Marcus with interest. Albert was right about you, young man. You truly are extraordinary. I'm just trying to do what's right, he replied modestly. As your father would have, Linda added softly. In the following weeks, Marcus and Helen worked tirelessly to implement their restructuring plan. Under Linda's calm and experienced leadership, the changes began to show results quickly. Departments were reorganized, processes simplified, and new projects launched using Marcus's innovative methodology. The investigation into Richard's practices revealed even more irregularities than they had initially suspected. Inflated contracts, embezzlement through shell companies, and even industrial espionage. The case was handed over to the authorities, and Richard now faced serious criminal charges. Albert, slowly recovering in the hospital, received daily updates and couldn't hide his pride in his daughter and Marcus's work. The partnership between the two had grown into a close friendship, and eventually something more, though they both tried to keep it discreet in the professional setting. 2 months after Albert's heart attack, Montgomery Engineering had not only stabilized its financial situation, but also secured 2 major international contracts thanks to the new management model. Business and Construction magazine published a cover story on the company's surprising turnaround, highlighting the innovative leadership of Linda, Helen, and the mysterious special advisor who had revolutionized the construction firm's processes. On a sunny afternoon, Marcus visited Albert at his home where he continued his recovery. The older man looked much better, color had returned to his face, and his eyes once again sparkled with vitality. The doctors say I can return to work part-time next month, Albert said cheerfully. Though from what I see, you 3 are doing just fine without me. Marcus smiled. The company is your creation, Mr. Montgomery. We're just trying to honor your legacy. Albert looked at him thoughtfully. And your father's too, Marcus. Anthony would be very proud of you. Marcus felt a lump in his throat. I hope so. I'm sure of it. Albert picked up an envelope from his desk. There's something I want to show you. I asked Martha to dig through the old files. He handed the envelope to Marcus, who opened it carefully. Inside was a yellowed photograph, 2 young men smiling in front of a construction site, one clearly a younger Albert, the other, my father, Marcus whispered, immediately recognizing the man who looked so much like him. Our first project together, Albert explained nostalgically. Before Charles Williams joined the company, before everything went wrong, we were just 2 friends with big dreams. Marcus studied the photo with emotion, noticing the genuine joy in his father's eyes, something he'd rarely seen during his childhood. Why did he never tell me about you? About Montgomery Engineering? Albert sighed deeply. The betrayal hurt him deeply, and my cowardice in not standing up for him. That must have been unforgivable to him. Anthony was a man of principles. He was, Marcus agreed, remembering his father's unwavering integrity, even in the hardest times. But he also believed in redemption. He used to say, no matter how many mistakes we make, there's always a chance to do right. Albert smiled, moved. That sounds just like him. The older man paused before continuing. Marcus, there's something else I need to tell you, something I've been putting off. The serious tone made Marcus brace for an important revelation. What is it, Mr. Montgomery? When your father left the company, he took documents proving the revolutionary technique was his creation. Charles wanted to sue him over it, but I stopped him, knowing Anthony was just trying to protect his work. What none of us knew at the time was that your father had patented the technique in his own name. Marcus's eyes widened in surprise. He patented it? Albert nodded. Yes. And when Charles found out years later, he tried to challenge the patent but failed. Your father's documents were irrefutable. Eventually, Montgomery Engineering had to buy the usage rights. Wait, Marcus said, confused. Are you saying the company paid royalties to my father? Exactly. For years, we sent payments to an account he specified. I never knew if he actually received the money, since we could never contact him directly. Everything was handled through a lawyer. Marcus tried to process this. His father had never mentioned anything about royalties or patents. They had always lived modestly, even struggling financially at times. I don't understand. If he was getting those payments, why did we live so simply? Albert seemed equally puzzled. I don't know, Marcus. The amounts weren't astronomical, but they were certainly significant. The patented technique became industry standard. A sudden thought struck Marcus. And those payments, did they continue after my father's death? Yes. The contract stipulates royalties must be paid for 50 years, or as long as the technique is used by the company. We assumed they'd go to Anthony's legal heirs. Marcus stood up, agitated. Mr. Montgomery, I never received any payments. Neither did my mother before she passed. Albert also looked alarmed. That's not possible. The payments were sent religiously every month, to the account Anthony specified. Which lawyer handled these payments? Albert thought for a moment. Ronald Barnes, Richard's father. The revelation hit Marcus like a thunderbolt. Suddenly, many things began to make sense. Richard's immediate hostility, his determination to discredit him, his knowledge about the company's past. Ronald Barnes embezzled the money, Marcus concluded, anger rising within him. And Richard probably found out and continued the scheme after his father's death. My God, Albert seemed devastated. That would explain why Richard was so upset when you showed up. He must have recognized your last name immediately. Marcus tried to calculate in his head. If these payments have been happening for over 20 years, it's a fortune, Albert finished. With interest and adjustments, we're talking about millions. Marcus sat back down, stunned by the scale of the fraud. How do we prove it? We have all the payment receipts, Albert replied already, regaining his usual energy. And with the ongoing investigation into Richard's other activities, it won't be hard to follow the money trail. I'll alert our legal department immediately. At that moment, Helen walked into the room, immediately sensing the tension. What happened? She asked, concerned. Albert quickly summarized the situation for his daughter, whose expression shifted from shock to outrage. That scoundrel, she exclaimed. Stealing from the company wasn't enough. He stole your inheritance, Marcus. Marcus was still processing everything. In less than 3 months, he had gone from janitor to executive, uncovered the truth about his father's past, and now learned he was the rightful heir to a fortune that had been stolen from him. What do we do now? He finally asked. Justice, Albert said firmly. We'll reclaim what's rightfully yours and make sure Richard pays for his crimes. It won't be easy, Helen warned. Richard probably hid the money well, and he'll fight tooth and nail. We're not afraid of a fight, Marcus replied, a new determination growing inside him. My father spent his whole life being wronged. I won't let his memory continue to be dishonored. Albert nodded in approval. First thing tomorrow, we'll gather the legal team and start the proceedings. As he left the Montgomery home that night, Marcus felt caught in a whirlwind of emotions. So many revelations, so many changes in such a short time. Helen walked him to his car, holding his hand in a gesture of support. How are you feeling? She asked softly. Honestly, I don't know, he admitted. It's like my whole life was built on sand. Everything I thought I knew about my father, about our past. There are so many missing pieces. Helen squeezed his hand gently. We'll find those pieces, Marcus. Together. He looked at her, feeling a surge of gratitude and something deeper. That had been growing between them. Thank you for standing by me in all this. I don't know if I could have faced it alone. Helen smiled, her eyes reflecting the moonlight. You're not alone anymore, Marcus. You never will be again. As he drove home, Marcus thought about his father and the photo he had seen. 2 young dreamers, full of hope and ambition, never to imagining the hardships they would face. Someday, he promised himself, he would tell this whole story to his own children, a story of injustice, perseverance, and ultimately, redemption. What he didn't know was that redemption would come sooner than expected in a way no one could have predicted. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us newcomers a lot. Now, continuing, the next morning, Montgomery Engineering was in an uproar. The investigation into Richard Barnes had taken a new turn when the police, armed with search warrants, raided his home and private office. The scandal quickly spread through New York City's business circles, with economics journalists calling incessantly for statements. Marcus arrived at the company earlier than usual, finding Martha already at her desk, frantically answering phone calls. "Good morning, Mrs. Williams," he greeted. "Looks like things are already hectic." The secretary looked up, appearing exhausted. "Marcus, I'm so glad you're here. Dr. Carter has called an emergency meeting. Conference room in 15 minutes. In the conference room, all the top executives had gathered, including Helen and Peter Foster. Linda entered last, accompanied by a well-dressed man Marcus recognized as Michael Turner, the company's lead attorney. "Good morning, everyone," Linda began, her tone serious. "As you may already know, the situation with Richard Barnes has escalated significantly. Michael will update us on what happened." The attorney took the floor. After receiving new information yesterday afternoon, he glanced briefly at Marcus. "We expanded the scope of the investigation to include possible embezzlement of royalties owed to the Johnson family. The preliminary evidence was so compelling that we secured a court warrant in record time." "And what did they find?" asked Peter, visibly nervous. "Crucial documents," Michael replied. "Original contracts, records of transfers to offshore accounts, and most importantly, Ronald Barnes's will, explicitly detailing the scheme and instructing his son to continue it." A murmur spread through the room. Helen looked at Marcus, who remained outwardly calm, though internally processing the impact of this revelation. "Does this mean—" Helen began. "It means we have irrefutable evidence," Linda finished, "not just of fraud against the company, but of the systematic diversion of funds that legally belong to the Johnson family." Marcus finally spoke. "And Richard, where is he?" Michael and Linda exchanged glances. "Gone," the attorney answered. "By the time the police reached his home, he had already left. We believe he's fled the country." "How is that possible?" Helen asked, outraged. "He was under investigation. Apparently he received some kind of advance warning," Michael explained. "We're checking for a possible information leak." Linda took over again. "The purpose of this meeting is to decide how we'll handle this publicly. This situation could significantly impact the company's reputation." Peter seemed genuinely disturbed. "I can't believe Richard would do something like this. I've known him for years." "Sometimes the people we think we know surprise us, Peter," Linda replied gently. "The documents leave no room for doubt." Marcus observed everyone's reactions. Some executives looked shocked. Others, like Peter, were reluctant to believe the evidence. A few, he noticed, seemed almost relieved, as if finally freed from a burden. "I suggest full transparency," Marcus said, surprising everyone. "Montgomery, engineering has nothing to hide. On the contrary, it's as much a victim as I am." Linda nodded in agreement. "I agree. Transparency is the best policy in this case. We'll show that we're actively correcting past mistakes, not hiding them." The meeting continued with discussions about communication strategy, additional legal measures, and the financial impact of the situation. It was decided that Linda would make an official statement to the press later that day, with Marcus and Helen by her side, demonstrating unity. After the meeting, Helen pulled Marcus aside into a quiet corner. "How are you handling all this?" she asked, concerned. Marcus sighed deeply. "Honestly, I'm trying not to let anger consume me. Thinking about how my mother struggled to raise me alone after my father left, how she worked 2 jobs to pay for my education, while all that money, which was rightfully ours, was being siphoned off by the Barnes family." Helen placed a hand on his shoulder. Your anger is completely justified, but don't let it define your actions now. I won't, he assured. Hurdle, I want justice, not revenge, for my parents and for myself.